Hi everybody. What I'd like to do today is focus on introductions. I think a lot of students dread, opening up their papers, facing that blank screen. It's one of the hardest things to do as a writer is to just get started. And what often happens with student writers, I feel, is you open up your papers with the same kind of introduction, right? It's this kind of one size fits all. You're not excited about it. Your readers are most likely not excited about it. So I'll give you some new ideas on how to open up those papers. And as always, you can watch this video as many times as you need and keep these ideas in your toolbox and pull them out as needed. So let's get going here. The first slide. This is the most common introduction. It's probably the one you've used the most frequently in your academic writing. Intro number one, the inverted triangle. And it looks just like it sounds. We've got this triangle here. And basically what you're doing is you're opening up with a general statement about the topic just to give your readers kind of a broad sense of what you're about to explore. And then as that introductory paragraph narrows down, you offer some more specifics about that statement, about that topic. You're narrowing your focus, and then you've probably heard this since, grade school. What comes right at the end of that introductory paragraph? Your argument, your thesis statement. So if that sounds familiar, it's not a surprise, right? A lot of us learn this from an early age, and it just kind of carries over into high school writing and into the university, college level writing as well. Again, nothing wrong with it, but we just want to make everyone clear on that. This is the most common. And if you're tired of it, well, here we go. We can try out some different ones, a little more creative here. So intro type number 2, the narrative introduction. I like this one a lot. It's one of the hardest kind of introductions to pull off well, but if you can do it well, it's the most interesting, I think. It really grabs readers the quickest. So what you're doing here is now you're opening up with a short story to kind of hook readers in, to taking an interest, but it's a story that also sets the stage for your argument. And this is the important thing to keep in mind, is it obviously can't just be some interesting story that has nothing to do with your argument. It needs to connect in some way. So some pros and cons to this. As you would imagine, it's a fresh, creative way to begin your work and grab readers early on. That story is likely going to focus on a human being, right? So you're putting a real face to the issue. You're showing how this human being, this person, is connected to the topic on the ground level, out in the real world, and everybody wants to read a story. Think about those articles that you enjoy reading most. It usually focuses on a person. You're connected to that person on an emotional level. It grabs your interest early. The downside to this is sometimes if your story is too long or it doesn't clearly connect to your argument, your readers are likely going to lose interest and not follow you into the real meat of your paper, the real body paragraphs where you start to bring in outside research and expand on your ideas and to defend your stance. And that's really, counterproductive, where maybe it's a very interesting story, but if it goes on too long, and it doesn't have that clear, concrete bridge to the rest of your paper, readers will often jump ship early on in your work. And you don't want that to happen, especially after you put in so much labor as a researcher. So keep this in mind. You might find it useful, and it might work well for your topic. That story. What is that story? Who do you want to focus on? And how can you make that story connect to the larger focus of your paper early on? The narrative intro. Here's another type, the interrogative introduction. It's just like what it sounds like. You're opening up your paper with a question that, one, it has to introduce your topic. It also has to interest readers, right? It's a question that, I never thought of that, or I'm curious to hear more about that and how the writer is going to attempt to answer that question, right? It can't just be a question that just kind of hangs there and it feels very stale. It needs to be something that grabs readers and introduces your topic. And it also, the third point I put up here, gives your readers a sense of what you're going to focus on as your work continues. In other words, this is a question that you're constantly coming back to in the body of your work. You're always connecting your body paragraphs back to this question, attempting to answer it in more depth. So here I just put one tiny example. There are a million questions I could put up here, but this is from a student paper a while back. She wrote, to what extent do women and men who work in different occupations also work in different space? That question in one sentence covers a lot. It really packs in a lot right there. I know exactly what this student writer's topic is. I'm also personally interested in this. I never really thought about that. You know, what angle is she going to take here? What is she going to explore as this paper continues? And I also know from this question exactly what she's focused on, right? The different genders, how different occupations, the experience, the space, all of those differences that she's going to explore later on, they're all emphasized early on in the paper with that question. And as the body of her paper continues, she'll continue coming back to that question and again answering it in more depth. So sometimes that question is good. It's just very tricky to make sure you get that question. It's the right one, and it covers all those important characteristics. Another one I put up here is the paradoxical introduction. I like this one. I like all of these, but this one's interesting because now instead of opening with a question, you're beginning with an assumption that most readers would accept as true. They'd all agree on. Yeah, I think that's correct about topic X. That's how I would see it. That's how most people see it. But then you as a writer are kind of throwing them a curveball, and you're formulating a thesis that challenges that assumption and seems paradoxical. That can't be true. So I put up here an example, if we were to just kind of distill this and break it down, is what you're doing with the paradoxical introduction is this. Most people think this about topic X, but I'm going to show you something new that runs counter to your assumptions. I like that because now as a reader, I thought I knew everything about topic X, and most people thought that same things. But now this writer is going to throw me a curveball and show me actually there's something new that I never considered when it comes to this topic and that are going to challenge my assumptions. So I really want to keep going into the body of that work and find out, how my assumptions are going to be challenged and what new information I might learn about that topic that I didn't necessarily consider. So the paradoxical introduction is a great way to kind of surprise readers and show them something fresh and new that they maybe didn't expect before reading your paper. This is another good one, intro type number 5 I put up here, the Minding the Gap introduction. So minding the gap. When you use this kind of introduction, you're calling your reader's attention to a gap in the research. And then you're basically using the rest of your essay to fill in that gap. So Minding the Gap intro basically says, wait a minute, there's something missing from this conversation, and my research and ideas will fill in this gap. I went out as a researcher, I noticed that most people were focused on this and this and this, but nobody's really paying attention to this over here. And that's what I'm going to shine a light on in my paper, is this kind of under-researched, under-talked about portion of the conversation centered around this topic that nobody's really looking at. So again, everybody's paying attention over here to this and this and this, and we hear a lot about all of those things when it comes to this topic, but nobody's really looking at this. I'll give you one just off the top of my head, a student writer who wrote on steroids. She noticed that most writers, researchers, people in the industry were always focused on professional athletes. Their usage, their habits, their motivations for using steroids, the health consequences, performance, boost, etc., but nobody was really looking at amateur athletes and why they use so much steroids. It's a huge industry, and she wanted to open up her paper and mind the gap, so to speak, and shine a light on this portion of the conversation that nobody was really talking about. So minding the gap, always a good idea if you feel like there's a portion of that topic that nobody's talking about. So that's it as far as introductions go. Again, these don't fit a cookie cutter mold. They're just some starting ideas to help you get going in a new creative way so that you don't fall into that rut where you feel like, oh man, I'm just starting this paper the same way I started all my other papers. So hopefully now you have some more creative ideas to begin. And you can always watch this video as many times as you need. And as always, let me know if you have any questions.